And welcome back. Our nation is deeply divided with issues that go beyond simple disagreement. The ongoing emergence of binary problems adds to a growing pessimism among citizens and casts shadows over our current state. Yet, organizations like Color Us United work to actively bridge those divisions and promote unity. They support individuals disillusioned by government, corporate, and media portrayals of America as a divisive country. And joining us now to share more is the president of Color Us United, Kenny Xu. And Kenny, good to have you with us.
Good to be on. Thank you.
Thank you. For somebody who may not be so familiar with the organization, obviously, give us a little bit about Color Us United and the community that you are serving.
That's a good point. We actually advocate for a race-blind America. So we don't care what color of the skin you are when you join Color Us United, as long as you believe that the ideals that unify America are not the ideals of tribe or race or skin color as your identity, but your identity as brothers and sisters, as friends, as neighbors, as family members. Those are all things that are so much more important in your career and in life than your race or your skin color. And if you are willing to unify behind those ideals in a divided time in our country and take on the policies that try to promote division on the basis of race, we will support you, we will help you, we will be your voice.
So, talk to me about how you arrived to the conclusion of, no, we don't look at skin color. Why do you think that's beneficial?
It's through my personal experience. So my parents are immigrants from China. I was born here in America, and I experienced the great goodness of this country. Loving people of all races, including Caucasians, took me in, loved on me, schooled me, taught me, everything like that, taught me English, taught my family when they were poor and everything like that with no social connections, got them to advance. And a lot of Asian Americans share this story. Their parents come here with no money and social connections, and within one generation, they're outcompeting whites. They're outcompeting all Americans in educational advancement, which is logged in my new book, An Inconvenient Minority. So that personal experience really shaped me and showed how it's really not about your race. It's about your culture. It's about what do you do with the opportunities that you've been given in society. And I want that message to be heard across the rest of the country.
But you'll have somebody who, like myself, will say, listen, that's great on personal experience, but if you live on, first, the black side of the spectrum, you would understand that you've been in this country for a long time, and much that's been talked about is the fact that access and not being granted that same kind of access or equality or equity. So how would you answer that?
I think the best kind of access is education. One of the reasons why Asian Americans are successful in the United States, despite having a lot of the disadvantages that a lot of minorities have, is that they rely on education to really move them forward. Asian Americans, for example, study twice as many hours as the average American. The average white person studies 8 hours, the average Asian studies 13, the average black person studies 5.5. How can we say that, we are a country divided on the basis of race when there are also vast disparities in cultural achievement as it comes to education? So I would say education is the biggest avenue towards getting out of those kinds of things, but it does require hard work. It does require those kinds of things. And I would advocate for those unifying values over a society that says, well, access is determined by skin color.
Hang out with me for a minute on this, Kenny, because I want to ask you the question. You can say education, but then on the other side, somebody say, listen, before I can even make it to the school, I got to make it out of my house. And when I deal with the issues of, income inequality, when I listen to the issues of housing discrimination, I can listen to all these other things before I even get to the area of education. Granted that education is very important, but there's so many other areas that we can tackle before we get to education. Follow what I'm saying?
I do, and I would like to bring up the example of New York City. In New York City, Asian Americans are actually the population that are most in poverty. Actually, they have the highest poverty rate out of all of the racial groups, higher than even Black Americans. Why? Well, because a lot of the Asian Americans are store owners, they're street sweepers, they are people who are way under the poverty rate. But if you look at these low-income Asian Americans' educational achievement, even despite facing all of these income disadvantages, they're actually higher in terms of math and reading test scores than even white Americans. Even upper middle class white Americans are outcompeted by low income Asians in New York City. Don't take my word for it. Go buy my book, An Inconvenient Minority, to see for yourself. I've spoken with a lot of these poor Asian Americans. And by the way, poor people of all races, including Black Americans. And these people agree. How are they able to advance beyond their poverty? It is through the educational ideal, and they spend a lot of work. They spend all of their extra pennies that they work in the restaurants on their children and on helping them rise in education.
I think that's the story for a lot of different demographics. Let me go back to you. On the statistics, you said that Asian Americans lead in poverty. Can you clarify that again, once again?
They lead in poverty in New York City. That's what I meant.
And according to who?
According to the New York City poverty statistics.
New York City poverty statistic by, because I'm not, I've studied poverty for a minute. I didn't get that statistic. I just wanted to just double check it. You know, we got a fact check on the show, so I got to make sure that, you know, what it is. That's why I said, where did you get that statistic from? Because there will be some that challenge.
Yeah, I think it comes from the employment and poverty statistics and the local government sources. But, you know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's where I got it from.
So talk to me about social identities, because obviously there's social identities that exist out there, and how does putting the social identity aside actually help somebody?
How does what, sorry?
When you put social identity aside, how does it affect, what kind of effect does that create?
It means that I can approach you without assumptions based on the color of your skin. You and I, you see, we're having a polite, respectful conversation. That's how we should approach each other. You shouldn't make assumptions about me, my politics, my background, based on my skin color. And I shouldn't make assumptions about you. These days, there are a lot of Black Americans who are upper income. There are a lot of Asians who are lower income. And the way that you appear, the way that you dress, the way that you speak, those are all important in recognizing who you are as a person. And so I encourage people to practice color blindness, which is to intentionally, you know, not assume things about a person's background based on their skin color.
Talk to me. You also took on Harvard University, and you had an issue with Harvard University. Let's bring it to the forefront. What was that about?
So Harvard University was practicing the opposite of what I've been preaching, which is they are making assumptions about you based on your skin color. If you identify as an Asian American, or even if you don't, if you just have an Asian last name, Harvard is going to rate you significantly lower on a thing called a personality test, which is determinant of your ability to get into Harvard. They would rate Asians lowest out of all of the races on this personality test, just to admit others with lower standards. Asians, of course, are scoring the highest academically. They're scoring the highest extracurricularly at Harvard. But the personality score is what dooms them, and it's unfair and it's discriminatory. I led the charge with Students for Fair Admissions to fight against that, and we recently won at the Supreme Court.
So when you talk about that win, how does that feel for you, given the fact that it was an uphill struggle?
It was a huge uphill struggle. You know, people told me, even when I was early on, don't fight for rejected college Asians. They're not sexy. They're not somebody you should fight for. Nobody cares anyway. But it turns out a lot of Americans do care, because Americans fundamentally want people to be treated on the basis of merit. They don't want skin color for or against somebody. 75% of Americans believe race should not be used in college admissions. And in every state in which people try to use race in college admissions, it has been rejected, even in California, a very liberal state. So we care about minorities. We should care about helping minorities, but that should be done at the K-12 level. That should not be done in the college level.
Well, you know, the problem is when you get to college, we have a history of universities, colleges, who simply do not admit. And you can say, listen, they've been given an equal platform and have been given an equal platform for a long period of time. And in the process of being given an equal platform for a long period of time, have failed to just demonstrate equality and equity when it comes to, and I don't even want to say equity, because you have plenty of people where we have examples who are academically credible to enter into an institution, but do get bypassed just on this issue. Do get bypassed on the issue of race, and this has been a long-standing issue for a while. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I would say, universities have long struggled with the issue about how to build a diverse and an inclusive space. I would say that the best way to build a diverse and inclusive space is to treat people based on their merit, right? If you start lowering standards, which Harvard had been doing for Black Americans, they were accepting Black Americans with SAT scores 270 plus points lower than Asian Americans. If you start lowering standards, you actually create a segregated culture because students will tend to study together in the same cohort of people who are academically in their range. And if you're not academically in their range, they're going to exclude you. So what's the best way to build an inclusive campus is to not lower standards, is to make sure that everybody admitted is qualified so that they can mingle with each other as academic equals.
Well, the thing about academic standards is, Kenny, that you got to think about it here. SATs are standardized scores, and everybody may not fare well in a standardized score. I wasn't great at taking standardized tests, but guess what? I graduated at the dean's list at the top of my class, but yet and still I didn't do well in the SAT. Matter of fact, didn't do too well whatsoever. I think there's a conversation that needs to be had for people who don't necessarily do well on standardized tests, and that being the sole barometer for academic merit.
Yeah, that's definitely a conversation we should have. I'm super glad that you graduated at the top of your dean's list. We want to make sure everybody has a good shot at graduating at the top 25% of their class. And I think that the end of affirmative action is going to help that.
Well, I think also, I don't know, because when you really look at it, the fact is you're not talking about underqualified people being about getting in. I think you have people who are actually qualified that are able to go to these institutions, people who can do the institution very well. Now, on the other hand, when you look at what's going on in these educational institutions, we understand that you're given the opportunity to make a choice. And the reality is there have been plenty of examples, where you have people of equal score, equal talent, but yet and still, when the number gets picked, it's not those in communities of color. Hence the need for affirmative action. It's not the saying that people are not credible enough to attend a college or a university. It's about the fairness, if you will, sometimes, in the process that has long been. And I think that if we're really going to put it out here, in the end, by this law in some way, shape, or form, it also says we're going to rely on the university to do what's right, when in many cases, the university and the college hasn't done what's right historically.
Yeah,
that's why the need for the law exists.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. The university has not done right. They have lowered standards to admit less qualified Black Americans. They have raised standards to discriminate against high qualified Asian Americans. And, they have done it for legacies too. They have admitted lower qualified legacy students and children of donors because they want to get rich off of their legacy package. This is not right. This is not fair. I'm pushing for fairness. I want everybody to be admitted based on merit, and I get your frustration with standardized test scores, but they are still the best way to determine objectively toe-to-toe which applicant is competitive.
No, we're going to disagree right there, brother. I can tell you that right now. We're going to disagree. I'm not going to sit here and say that standardized test scores are the best way to determine whether or not somebody's the best student or not. If you've got an A average going throughout the course of the, if you got an A average going through the course of the year, you go and you take that SAT and you mess that SAT up, that should not be the sum total of your whole educational experience. That's one test, and that one test cannot be the basis.
You have an A average in courses that are not rigorous. It's not the same as having an A average in courses that are.
Say again, in courses that are not rigorous.
If you have an A average in courses that are not rigorous, it's not the same as having an A average in courses that are.
So when I get to Harvard or another institution, I'm going to take some of these courses, right? I mean, all these courses that I'm taking in college and universities are not going to be as rigorous either.
Look, I'm really glad that you graduated in your dean's list.
No, this ain't got to do with me. No. Take me out of the equation. Take me out of the equation.
Well, I'll tell you the hard facts. The Black Americans at Duke University who go to the math major have a 3 times likelier rate of dropping out of that STEM major and going to a less rigorous major because of affirmative action. That is a fact. Go to that Arcidiacono paper 2012. Okay? I'm trying to help Black Americans succeed. And Black Americans do not succeed when they are put in classes in which they are admitted because of affirmative action.
I don't think you're trying to help Black Americans succeed because you can't speak for Black Americans, man. You can't do that. You can't say that. Now you might be trying to help yourself succeed, but you can't say that you can't say that you're helping Black Americans succeed because guess what? That's not the path to success. You ask most Black Americans about the end of affirmative action and this recent law that's happened in the Supreme Court, they're going to tell you they're not in favor of that because it's not about the fact that it's not about the fact of merit as being said. You got credible people who have not been given a shot. And it has been long historic that Black people have not been given a fair shot. It's not about equality, it's about equality, it's about equity as well. And so when you talk something like that, you gotta be able to say the whole story. And the whole story is that there has been a history, long-standing history. So now the end of affirmative action is here, and we're hoping, what the hope is, that somebody's going to do right that hasn't done right already. And I think that's absolutely insane to think that in the end, we're going to hold the people who haven't done right to now do right who haven't done right. That doesn't make no sense. Make it make sense, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to help students, including students of color, is at the K-12 level. We need to make sure that our public school system has qualified teachers. We need to make sure that the standards are raised. We need to make sure that school discipline policies are successfully executed so that the students can learn and be in an environment where they can learn. That's what my new book, School of Woke, is all about, because it tells about how the K-12 system has gone in such disarray. So if I have a lot of thoughts on public education, I'm willing to talk about it, but that's my answer to that.
Yeah, we can continue this conversation all day. It's been good talking, man. I mean, I appreciate the conversation, and I think that there's some things that really need to be discussed. But when we look at what the educational system is right now, both in K-12 and also in higher education, we know what the challenges are. We know what the disparities are. So, I mean, to a certain extent, I understand what you're saying, and to a certain extent, I respectfully disagree. But I do want to give you the opportunity to let people know where they can check you out and catch your work.
Well, I appreciate it. So you can check me out at Kenny M. Xu, Kenny MXU, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and buy my new book, School of Woke and an Inconvenient Minority, where I talk about these issues with people who respectfully disagree. At Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and IndieBound, wherever books are sold.
And so, what's coming up next for you?
Lots of things, new initiatives with Colorists United, just making sure that high standards are achieved. My next issue that I'm really passionate about is an issue that you are passionate about as well, which is making sure that K-12 education gives the right standards to all children.
All right, Kenny, we're going to leave it there, man. It's been good having you here. Thanks for being with us here on the show.
Thank you.
All righty.
All right, thanks.